Howdy, it's Jim Morado, and this is May 2022, and we're at Lincoln's New Salem in Illinois. This is about 20 or so miles away from Springfield. I call it the bonus round of Springfield. If you've gone to Springfield and seen all the Lincoln stuff, you might get around to seeing New Salem. I like New Salem a lot. It's kind of a little pioneer village. I hear they have reenactors there, but the two times I've been, I've not really seen a whole lot of the reenactor types, but it's still a neat place to go and just check out. And Lincoln lived here for several years before he moved to Springfield, a very influential area in Abraham Lincoln's life. And I actually have a couple of brochures. I have a couple that they gave me on this most recent visit, and I also have one, I believe, from the 50s. It's old and it's starting to get a little shredded, but they both have good information. Actually, the older one has better info. I think people used to read those a little more carefully back then. But I'm going to just walk through the village and walk with me, and I'll give you some information about each house from the brochures. I'll also read a little bit. I'm going to keep this pretty academic just because I think each building is interesting, and I just like this place. There's also a museum. I'll put up a separate video about the museum. But yeah, we're going to Lincoln's New Salem. They do theater productions here during some of the seasons. I've never been to one of those. I'd sure love to. But yeah, just come with me. Yeah, and from my 1950s brochure on New Salem, a few things I wanted to read. As the passing years add to the stature of Lincoln among the figures of men in history, so do they change the significance and importance of New Salem State Park among the historic shrines of America. Infinite labor and endless research characterize the recreation of this village, where young Lincoln clerked in a store, chopped wood, enlisted in the Black Hawk War, served as postmaster, deputy surveyor, and legislator, failed in business, and courted in Rutledge. The park, situated on a hill 100 feet high, overlooks the Sangamon River Valley. It was on this bluff in 1828 that James Rutledge and John Cameron erected their homes, and the following year, after building their grist and sawmill on the river below, laid out the town of New Salem and started selling lots. Strangely, the 6 years that Lincoln spent in New Salem almost completely encompass the town's brief history. The community was growing and thriving when Lincoln reached there in 1831, but in 1839, just 2 years after he had left for Springfield to practice law and advance himself in politics, the county seat was established at nearby Petersburg. Thereafter, New Salem declined rapidly. And we're actually coming up on our first house here, and I'm going to walk with you through most of this. And this is actually the Onsot Residence, and beside it is the the Cooper shop. And from my old brochure, Henry Onsot Cooper built a 2-room house in the spring of 1835. Later, he added the frame lean-to. This was Onsot's third home in the village. He built his first home and first Cooper shop in the eastern portion of town about 1830 upon his arrival in New Salem. From 1833, the Onstots lived at the tavern, which they operated after the Rutledges moved to Sandridge. Onstot erected his second shop while operating the Rutledged Tavern in 1834. A year later, he built his residence to the west and lived there until 1840. Abraham Lincoln and Isaac Onstot, the eldest son, were friends and often studied together by the light of the fire kindled by the Cooper's shavings. In 1840, the shop was moved to Petersburg, where Onstot carried on his business for many years. Later, weatherboarding was added to the exterior. Larger windows were installed, and it was used as a residence until 1922, when it was purchased by the old Salem Lincoln League, stripped of the weatherboard and re-erected on the original site. So that's pretty cool, and from what I understand, it's the only original building still there, and I think it's partially original, if you want to be technical. And Onstot was from Kentucky. We're coming up on the Joshua A. Miller and John Jack H. Kelso residence. Miller and his brother-in-law, Jack Kelso, came with their families to New Salem. On November 17, 1832, Miller purchased 2 lots from John Cameron for $25 and lived there with his wife Nancy and their children, 4 or 5 of whom were born in New Salem. His home was headquarters for Baptist preachers who came to the neighborhood. Kelso and his wife lived with the Millers. Kelso and Miller had married the Turner sisters before coming to New Salem from Kentucky. Due to their relationship and family origins, this building was a dog trot-style home. The open area was used for eating or as a sitting area, away from the heat. Kelso also was a hunter, fisherman, and jack of all trades. He was able to supply all the money he needed by doing odd jobs, in addition to trapping and foraging. And we're actually coming up to their blacksmith shop. And also from my older brochure about Miller and Kelso's cabin, Joshua Miller, village blacksmith and wagon maker, and Jack H. Kelso, fisherman, hunter, and philosopher, erected a double house in 1832. They married sisters. Although both were industrious, their efforts were directed along different lines. Miller was engaged in shoeing horses, ironing wagons, and forging other ironwork, while Kelso was busy fishing, trapping, and reading. Lincoln was attracted to Kelso, and through him first became acquainted with the classics in literature. Both families left in 38 or 39. And we're coming up on the Robert Johnston residence. And we're going, there's some buildings kind of behind others, so we're not exactly going in order. Also a nice garden over here, too. I wanted to point that out. But from my newer brochure, Johnston and his family moved to New Salem and built a residence in 1832. He was a wheelwright, woodworker, and cabinet maker who also repaired furnishings and implements for local residents and made wooden gears for the town's 2 mills. The Johnstons were Cumberland Presbyterians and attended the Rock Creek camp meetings conducted by Reverend John M. Barry. And from the older brochure, it mentions he built a log cabin probably during 1831. The Johnsons, who had 3 children, were a family of modest means. They probably abandoned their home about 1839 during the general exodus from New Salem. And the old brochure spells it Johnson. The newer brochure spells it Johnston. Just for the record. And this is the Isaac Burner residence. Burner was born in Kentucky on September 24th, 1784. Isaac, his wife Susan, and their family moved to New Salem around 1829, where he bought 2 lots for $10 and erected a residence. His daughter Elizabeth married Isaac Gulliher, whose home site is to the west. Isaac's son, Daniel Green Burner, worked briefly at the second Barry Lincoln store. The Burner family left New Salem in 1835 and moved to the country about 6 miles south of Knoxville, Illinois. A common feature of early log homes was the sleeping loft, like the one in this home. And we're at the Martin Waddell residence now. Check out the chimney in here, by the way. Waddell and his family arrived in New Salem and built their residence in 1832. Waddell was a hatter who made rabbit fur hats for 50 cents, coonskin hats for $2, and wool felt hats. The kettle in front of his residence was used to make felt. Waddell had a wife, son, and several daughters to support. Considering the number of children he had, one room might have served as both a shop and a bedroom. The Waddells left New Salem in 1838. And a little more info from the older brochure I have. He built a 2-room house about 1832, made hats of fur and wool in the small south room, and boiled his wool in a kettle, which is the original one under the porch roof. The Waddells left New Salem in 1838. Where the house was abandoned or moved away is not known. And there's another part of their property right there. A little bit of interesting stuff there. And now we're coming up on the very fascinating Hill's Carding Mill and Wool House. Samuel Hill, owner of one of the stores, erected a carding mill and wool house in the spring of 1835. He advertised that he would commence carding on May 1st. The machines are nearly new and in first-rate order, and I do not hesitate to say the best work will be done. Just bring your wool in good order, and there will be no mistake. The mill was operated by Herndon Bale, who later purchased it from Hill. Presumably, it was operated until the general exodus from New Salem, and then was removed by Herndon Bale to Petersburg and operated there. The power was furnished by 2 oxen treading the circular inclined wheel on the north side. The double carter, typical of this period and vicinity, was built by the Schofield brothers in Byfield, Massachusetts in 1804. The idea and patterns were smuggled into America from England. Uncarded wool was stored in the attic. The excavations disclosed all the former post holes and machinery pits, and the restorations occupied the identical original locations. And there's some rabbit holes to go down there if you wanted to do some more research, but that is fascinating as heck. And just briefly, as we go to the next building, a little more information from my old Lincoln brochure. The Lincoln legend grows. The village fell into decay and neglect, but while it settled into the dust, the Lincoln legend grew. And as the image of Lincoln became brighter in the nation's consciousness, interest turned back to this deserted spot where he spent 6 formative years. The first active step towards recreating New Salem came in 1906, when William Randolph Hearst, lecturing at New Salem, Chautauqua, near Petersburg, became interested in the preservation of the site, bought it, and transformed it into a trust with the Chautauqua Association. In 1917, the Old Salem Lincoln League was formed in Petersburg to carry on research. In 1918, he transferred it to the state of Illinois. During the years, the public interest steadily grew and visitors came, money was raised, and the only original building in the park is the Onsot Cooper shop. Anyway, just a little more info there. And right now, we're looking at the first Barry Lincoln store. James and Rowan Herndon, brothers, built this store building probably in the fall of 1831 and engaged in the mercantile business. James Herndon, at that time a bachelor and boarding at the Rutledged Tavern, sold his interest to William F. Barry early in the summer of 1832, and later in the same year Rowan sold his interest to Abraham Lincoln, taking Lincoln's note in payment. About January 1833, Barry and Lincoln purchased the store of Reuben Radford and moved across the street to the second Barry Lincoln store. Since their stores have been restored and equipped, it was thought best to use the building as the post office and house the exhibit in graphic form, a record of the restoration of New Salem. It gets a little awkward there, but there's a little info on that. And we're coming up to Dr. Francis Raniere's office. This one-room log cabin was erected by Henry Simcoe in 1831, and it is believed he used it as a store. During the following year, Dr. Francis Raniere, I believe I'm pronouncing that right, and he was from Marietta, Ohio, by the way, 25 years of age, and the son of a French physician, came to New Salem and bought the lot and cabin from Simcoe. He lived here alone, using the cabin as a combined home and office until August 1834, when he married and moved to Clary's Grove with his bride, Sophia Ann Goldsmith. Eventually, the doctor and his wife moved to Petersburg, where he established an extensive practice and took an active interest in civic affairs. He died in 1859. And we're coming up on the Samuel Hill residence. Hill was born in New Jersey in 1800 and migrated to Cincinnati at age 20. He came to New Salem in 1829, where he started a store in partnership with John Mcneil. Hill was a small, slender man with a bad temper, but usually gallant to the ladies. After the dissolution of the partnership in 1832, Hill expanded his investments by erecting a carding mill in the spring of 1835. That July, Hill married Parthena Nance from nearby Farmers Point. They had one child, John, born in New Salem in 1839. In 1837, Hill sold his carding mill to Herndon Bale, and by 1840 had moved his family and store to Petersburg. And this is the Lukens-Ferguson residence. Pretty significant spot for the community. Actually, we're coming right up on it here in just a second. Yeah, there we go. Peter Lukens, a former Kentuckian and shoemaker who had made repaired leather goods, built a home and shop in 1831. In 1832, he and George Warburton left New Salem to develop nearby Petersburg, in which they had invested. Lukens won a card game with Warburton to determine the name of Petersburg, but soon sold his interest to John Taylor. Alexander Ferguson moved into Lukens' house and took up leather work in 1832. Ferguson moved from New Salem when he bought a nearby farm from Samuel Hill. And there's a brewery or a brew house, I guess you'd say, in Petersburg named, I think it's Hand of Fate. By the way, they have good stuff, and it's kind of named after that, or named in honor of that card game. And we're coming up on the Dr. John Allen residence. He was born on March 30th, 1801, near Chelsea, Vermont. He studied at Dartmouth Medical School in 1828 and went west to set up his practice. On August 18th, 1831, he purchased lots 3 and 4 from James Paintier and had his home constructed. By December 1831, Dr. Allen had organized a temperance society, and he went to Dartmouth and held meetings at his home. He was also a participant in the local debating society and a member of the Presbyterian Church. He married Mary E. Moore March 27, 1834. She died 2 years later. By 1840, Dr. Allen had remarried and moved to Petersburg, where he conducted a prosperous business until his death, April 1st, 1863. And we're coming up on the Rutledged Tavern. James Rutledge built the Rutledged Tavern in New Salem, probably in the fall of 1828. And as originally erected, it contained 2 large log rooms with attic above. The 2 frame rooms on the south were added later, either by Rutledge or another proprietor of the tavern. James Rutledge moved with his family early in 1833 to a farm at Sandridge. Nelson Alley became the new owner and rented the tavern to Henry Onsot, who occupied it until 1835. Alley occupied it for a year or so, and then rented it to Michael Keltner. In 1837, Alley sold the land and cabin to Jacob Bale, and from this time on it ceased to be the tavern and later became known as the Bale House. The Bale family lived in the tavern long after the rest of the town had disappeared. It was the first cabin to be erected and the last to succumb, falling to the ground about 1880. It is believed that the large east room was the combined kitchen, dining room, and guest sitting room. The west room was the family sitting room and bedroom, and perhaps the occasional lady guest was quartered there. The west lean-to room was the family bedroom, and the east lean-to was the summer kitchen and general storage room. The loft or half-story served as a large bedroom for the men guests and perhaps the Rutledge boys. When Lincoln boarded at the tavern, he slept in the loft. And appropriate transition from the Rutledge Tavern, we are now at the Hill Mcneil store, or the Hill McNamar store. McNamar in the old brochure I have. Same person, and that was John Mcneil, or McNamar, whatever. He was engaged to Anne Rutledge, who, had some sort of relationship with Abraham Lincoln. Very interesting story, but that was their store. And a little overlap, the second Barry Lincoln store. John McNamar, same guy as before, it is believed had a building, probably the village's first, constructed here in 1829. It is remembered as the town's only frame structure. McNamara and Sam Hill, who became postmaster December 25, 1829, operated a store here until 1831. They sold it to the Chrisman brothers. William Green later bought the building and rented it to Reuben Radford. Green eventually purchased Radford's goods and sold them to William Barry and Abraham Lincoln, whose store winked out. Later, John McNamara and silent partner John Allen operated a store here until the two moved the business to Petersburg in 1837. And by the way, there are some horses here, which obviously were very popular with the park visitors. And I'll go ahead and read. We're actually about to walk a good ways out. That's most of the village. We're actually walking out a little further. Gonna hit a few little places. Kind of what the lady at the visitor center told us was the other side of the tracks of New Salem. But we're going to the John Rowan Herndon residence. And Herndon married Minter Graham's sister, Elizabeth, in Kentucky in 1827. By the spring of 1831, they were living at New Salem, where Rowan and his brother James built a log residence, and later in the fall built a store. In the summer of 1832, James sold his half-interest in the store to William Berry and moved away. Rowan, not liking Berry for a partner, sold his half-interest to Abraham Lincoln. In 1833, Rowan accidentally shot and killed his wife. Soon afterward, he moved to Island Grove Township. So, interesting spot there, and it's not really open. I tried to peek in a peek hole there, but, what can you do? And we're coming up to the Denton Offutt store. Offutt first employed Abraham Lincoln in the spring of 1831 to take his goods by flatboat from Springfield to New Orleans. Due to a delay in crossing the mill dam, Offutt and Lincoln first visited New Salem. Offutt decided to open a store here, and he employed Lincoln to run it. In 1831, Offutt licensed to retail at New Salem. It was here that Lincoln received his first exposure to the business of merchandising. Within a year, it failed. Offutt left New Salem for Kentucky to help his brother race horses. At one time, Lincoln owned a half-interest in 2 town lots and a building in this vicinity. Lincoln may have also acquired a partnership with the store in 1832. Just looking around there a little bit. Just kind of a neat little area here. And by the way, it was right around the store. It's in between the store and the building behind it. Yeah, right in here is where Abraham Lincoln and Jack Armstrong had their famous wrestling match, and I just wanted to note that. I challenged my wife to a wrestling match while we were there. She declined. But yeah, I just thought that was kind of neat. And actually, if I had one of my cousins with me or somebody, I probably would have done it just to say I wrestled where Abraham Lincoln wrestled. There was a little well that was kind of down one of the walking trails, and I just thought that was interesting. I thought I'd put it up here. And we passed the William Clary store back there, by the way. I just wanted to point that out real quick. And hitting a few of the places we missed coming up. We're at coming up on the Isaac Goldhair residence. He was born in Hopkinsville, Hoptown, Kentucky, June 23rd, 1815. He married Isaac Burns' daughter, Elizabeth, built a residence, and had a son. He served with Lincoln during the Black Hawk War. And after he was discharged, he lost an election for coroner in 1832. Later moved to Knox County, Illinois. And yeah, so there's that. And we're coming up on the schoolhouse. The schoolhouse and Baptist church. And we've visited most of the main buildings, but I wanted to read just a little bit more to you from that brochure in the 1950s. By the way, we're about to see an outhouse. Just thought I'd point that out here in just a second. But yeah, I like this old, at least 1950s brochure. It goes into some neat detail. It talks about the authentic furnishings. 13 cabins, plus the Rutledged Tavern, and 10 shops, stores, industries, and a school and church cabin have been reproduced and furnished as they were in the 1830s. The furnishings, including many articles actually used by the New Salem folk of Lincoln's time and other dating back to the same period, were assembled and donated to the state by the Old Salem Lincoln League. The collection includes such authentic early 19th century articles as wheat cradles, candle molds, cord beds, flax shuttles, wool cards, dough and cornmeal chests, and early American pewter earthenware. For the doctor's offices, there are mortars and pestles, surgeons' instruments, medicine chests, and old medical texts. For the cobbler shop, awls, lasts, and rasps. For the tavern, old kitchen and tableware. And for the stores of calico bolts, implements, jars, and items of merchandise typical of the time. Even flower and vegetable gardens and trees have been planted for historical authenticity and to recreate the original village scene. Red haw, osage orange hedges, wild crab, wild plum, shadblow, witch hazel, wild blackberry, wild gooseberry, and other trees and plants popular with New Salem pioneers have been planted. At the homes of the 2 doctors in the village, herb gardens grow again. Restoration continues. At the foot of the hill on which New Salem stands is the Wagon Wheel Inn, a picturesque restaurant built of logs in keeping with other structures in the park. Overnight accommodations are available in several nearby towns. A custodian and a staff of park guides are on duty daily to direct visitors and point cut highlights of interest in the restructured village. And yeah, just wanted to make sure we get that in. You see some locals walking their dogs out here too. I think that's great. I actually talked to some of those people, and my wife and I are talking about going back down here to bring our dogs and to visit again. I really like this area. Petersburg is just a couple miles away, and it's kind of a neat little town that goes along with this. I think a lot of people miss this area, which is sad, and don't include it on their Springfield trips, and that's wrong. You need to make sure you hit this area too. And just real quick before I forget, we are near the saw and grist mill. John Cameron and James Rutledge had the saw and grist mill built in 1828, thus starting the town of New Salem. It is on the mill dam that Abraham Lincoln had his flatboat stuck on in 1831. And I hear you should be careful in that area. There's snakes. And my dogs did not like that information. But yeah, that's New Salem. I hope that didn't get too boring for you. If you watch this to the end, God bless you and thank you. And we're actually leaving New Salem and driving towards Petersburg. And I'm going to put up a separate video about Petersburg. I'm going to put up a couple of postcard images I have of this area too, just for you to check out, especially relating to Anne Rutledge. I'm totally fascinated with the Anne Rutledge Abraham Lincoln story. I wanted to mention too, and I'll mention this in other videos too, but we met Jan Jacoby, who authored the book Young Lincoln. It's historic fiction from a young Abraham Lincoln and his growing up, Kentucky, Indiana, and Illinois. It's from his perspective. It's very well done. I can't recommend it enough. Yeah, and just so you have them, here's a couple of pictures of Anne Rutledge's grave near Petersburg. It's real easy to find, and she's forever linked to New Salem. They don't really talk about her much though at New Salem, which I think is interesting. But yeah, Anne Rutledge, just a couple pictures for you there. Thanks for watching.